Okay, hello. This is Eneasz and Steven again.
Hi.
We have recorded this after the rest of this episode because we went and rushed the On Punching Nazis episode last week really quickly a few days after it happened, and the episode that you just heard was recorded before that. So we've gotten some listener feedback, and we wanted to put it on the air while it's still somewhat relevant, so we are recording the feedback to that episode right now and putting it at the end of this episode while someone still potentially cares about it.
That sounds about right.
Should I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, let's go with Not Without Incident. Not Without Incident said, "While I agree with a lot of your ambivalence about Nazi punching, I think there are two important points that weren't really addressed. First, Stephen mentioned this in passing, but the idea that the state protects against violence, also called the state monopoly on violence, doesn't really apply to some oppressed people. In other words, if you already feel the state isn't going to punish violence done against you or a group you support, there really isn't any reason not to punch Nazis from a societal norm standpoint. There is even an argument, put forth most famously recently in the book Ghettocide, that this lack of any serious state response to violence in poor black communities is the primary cause of the high murder rate." And we did briefly mention that, as he said, but I think that is a very good point, and we should have probably hammered on it a bit more.
I think you mentioned the state monopoly on violence, not me. But
okay.
In any case, whoever said it during the episode, yeah, we kind of glazed past that.
I'm not sure if I talked about this in a previous episode, but so I mentioned previously that Melissa has had that same experience with the police, where the police are not anyone you ever call. You do not want them involved in anything because they will only make things worse. And in cultures and societies like that, where, I mean, especially there are places in the U.S. where the police, you can't expect them to be on your side. And in those situations, I totally understand why someone would go to taking enforcement of those things into their own hands. I still think it's a bad idea, and that it would be better to have a functioning police system, but given that there's a lot of places in the US where we don't have one, I kind of see their point a bit. But on the other hand, the guy that punched him looked to be, a white kid in downtown New York. I'm not sure he has that.
Maybe excuse. He made the trip.
Okay.
But I mean, the other thing to consider too is that sounds like a good reason why you need to handle like life conflict sort of internally without getting the police involved. Mm-hmm. That's not a great reason for preemptively attacking people who say stupid things on the street, right?
Mm-hmm. Did you hear that? 'Cause I know you listen to Sam Harris a lot. Did you hear that interview when Sam Harris talked with a leader from the black community? I don't remember who it was now. But Sam Harris made the point, like, what is wrong with these people who, if someone steps on their shoes and scuffs them a bit, that they resort right away to violence and possibly even killing each other about it? And he said, Sam Harris, you are lucky to live in a society where you can simply accept that that's no big deal and not make a thing out of it. Whereas some of these young men, if they don't make a thing out of it, then their honor is at stake. They could be targeted for violent crimes by other people because they're seen as weaklings. And it's a self-preservation mechanism to keep up those appearances of being a badass. And it sucks for them because they don't have a choice. They have to respond with violence and get offensive and say, you got to apologize to me, or else their life, it gets really shitty.
Yeah, the guy painted a very good picture. His name was Glenn C. Lowry. And the episode was Racism and Violence in America. And it was a good conversation. I think it's one that was fruitful for both of them and for me to listen to as well. Yeah. It did sort of paint that picture, right? Where Glenn was giving the example of, you're on the bus and the guy scrapes your boots or whatever, and it's the kind of thing like, most people don't care about. But then if you don't say anything, well, then you're a pussy. His words, not mine. Mm-hmm. And, so then you've got to step up, and now there's a beef, and now you don't know how crazy this guy is. You can't go to the police and be like, hey, so this scary guy said he's going to kill me, but he hasn't done anything yet. So, like, it is really on you to handle. And that is reality for a lot of people. And you're right, the police aren't the go-to resource for them that we wish they would be.
And this is one of those episodes, I mean, Sam Harris gets a lot of crap, and I think in some cases deservedly so, but one of the things I love about him is that he is always willing to sit down and reasonably talk through things. I've had situations specifically on the punching Nazi things with Facebook, where there's some people get so emotionally invested in it, it's just not something you can talk about at all with them, which is fine. There's some subjects I can't talk about because I get too emotional. But Sam Harris, sits and talks and listens, and he's very thoughtful about everything. And by the end of the episode, it sounded like he had come around a bit and changed his view. And I was like, I have more respect for, Sam Harris.
Yeah.
He's willing to listen.
He updates a lot, and that's one of the things I like about his approach. Recently, he got on board and he updated to the what I consider the appropriate level of concern with AI risk. And so he's been talking about that a lot lately. Completely unrelated to all this, but just talking about a big update.
Should we go on to his second point?
Yeah, why not?
Not Without Incident. Second point is, I think there's a much more direct way that pro-Nazi speech and alt-right or even mainstream conservative speech in the US is more violent than you all acknowledged. He says 45,000 Americans die every year due to lack of access to healthcare. 200,000 Americans die prematurely from air pollution. And he goes on to give, several other statistics about how policy leads to death. And he says he can't vouch for how reliable any of these numbers are individually, but I think it's reasonable to argue that any speech espousing an extreme right-wing ideology is violent and lethal in a completely literal sense. And that is very much a thing that I have a strong aversion to, because he is literally citing examples of difference in opinion on policy. He's talking about pollution policy and healthcare policy, which are both very complicated topics with many other effects. And he's at this point saying that a difference in idea on pollution regulation or a difference of opinion on basically government regulation is violent and lethal, and therefore a violent response is justified. And I think that is exactly the opposite of what we want. It sounds like when someone says that disputes over healthcare are violent and lethal in a completely literal sense, that sounds like an excuse to kill and maim people who are on the other side of you, on the other side politically. And that is exactly where I don't want to go.
I think there's an important distinction to be made between like systematic, if it works out to where certain ways hospital regulations are run or some things tend to disenfranchise, say, homeless people tend to be of certain demographics, there might be historical reasons why that would end up being the case, and there could be a case made that's quite plausible that it's due to a history of segregation and discrimination and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between stabilizing and turfing a homeless person who walks into your ER and going to the street and hitting them in the face until they're bleeding to death, right? So like one is lethal and violent in a completely literal sense. The other one is just like, well, our hands are tied. The hospital staff, any of them might wish that they could keep them around and do everything they could to make them, fully healthy again. But that's just not in the cards for working in that system, right? No. But I guess if you're going to equate that and running out there and hitting that person in the face with a brick, I think that you're missing something pretty important, right? Or am I misreading that? To be fair...
I think that's exactly the point, that yes, laws are weapons of mass destruction. You can kill far more people with laws than you can by going out and individually stabbing someone. But on the other hand, at this point, he's making the case for violence of liberals versus conservatives, Democrats versus Republicans, and I think a civil war is much worse. At some point, the alternative of resorting to violence to enact your favored policies is worse than simply accepting some poor policies. But more to the point, once you are not talking anymore and fighting instead, you're no longer allowing your opinion of the world to be changed by evidence and words. It is now being enforced by guns and weapons. And so if you're wrong about something, there's no way to find that out. You're going to hurt the person who disagrees with you, and if he disagrees with you for a good reason, you'll never know.
Yeah, I think once you're talking about settling things with violence, things have gotten pretty out of hand, right? To be fair, not that incident did say, with the last sentence in that post, however, I'm not sure how well this holds up to scrutiny or if violence is the correct response, even if you accept everything above.
Yes.
And, just pragmatically, even if you thought that violence was the correct response, and you are talking about possibly violence between anyone who's liberal and anyone who's conservative, well, one of those groups tends to be more in favor of having lots of guns. So you can punch them all you want, but if they're gonna jump on the war bandwagon with you from the other side, I'm not sure this is a war you can win. So maybe talking it out would be easier. I think I'm taking this too lightly. There was one other really good thing they brought up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So go on with how he responded to me about that.
Yeah. So one obvious place to draw the line is violent resistance to politics that are explicitly murderous, but I think that is clearly too passive. Do you agree that violence would have been acceptable in response to Jackson's use of the Indian Removal Act, in parentheses, the Trail of Tears, even though that policy was not intended to be lethal? I thought that was a bit of a head scratcher, and I've been giving that some thoughts. Like other examples might be like Japanese internment camps in the 1940s, right?
Uh-huh. Would it have been okay to violently oppose those? And I think it probably would have.
I think it would have. I mean, so like the implicit, well, and in the Indian Removal Act, explicit part of the decision there was that like, look, we're going to tell them to move, and if they don't, well, we're going to make them, right? When we're talking about making people do things, you're talking about coercing them with violence or threats, right? Or plausible threats of violence. So, yeah, I don't want to equate the Trail of Tears or Japanese internment camps to what, I guess what exactly are we equating it to? Is he talking about the politics, or I guess the statistics about,
Well, he's saying at some point the laws are evil, and where do we draw that line between bad pollution regulation and having someone taken out of their home and shipped off to a internment camp?
I mean, explicit or poorly veiled, implicit, targeted discrimination? Is that a fair line? It's like we could say, everybody...
so here's what I would consider kind of an edge case, the redlining that they did in the... God, I don't even know what decade it was now. Decade before I was born, but not very much before it. It was, they had maps of cities, and there were neighborhoods that they would outline in red, which is where the term redlining came from. And they're like, in these neighborhoods, you can sell houses to black people, and in these neighborhoods, you can't. And that was not an explicit law anywhere, but it was policy, and real estate agents and realtors knew about it. And when black families tried to buy houses in these other neighborhoods, they were not allowed to. And that was a way of really not only socially segregating people, but making sure that the assets that black people had were less valued. They lost a lot of wealth by being put into worse neighborhoods. And it has led to a lot of problems, both socially and
economically.
Yeah, economically. And I don't know, is that a thing that it is unjust enough that it feels like something that you should maybe be able to respond to with violence, but what would you do? Like punch a bureaucrat in the face?
That's sort of what I was thinking about. And I mean, so I think there's a difference between saying there's an understandable outlet or there's an understandable situation where someone might want to react to the violence versus saying violence is the ideal response. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, if you're a victimized black family being redlined here and screwed into a bad neighborhood, I don't think the correct response would be punching a realtor in the face. They're just doing their job. And I mean, that's not a great defense, but a better defense would be, it's not like it's their decision.
Do you punch a lawmaker in the face who voted for that?
I mean, that almost makes more sense to me. It could be that the realtor is personally against it. They're just like, well, I mean, I'm making a living and I'm doing my best to try and, skirt it a little bit from, I mean, that's being too charitable, but
what if there was a journalist who was printing a lot of articles about how this is a great idea because the races should be kept separate?
Yeah, that sort of makes sense. I mean,
to punch them then, or to not punch them?
I guess I'd be more sympathetic to punching that person over the realtor who's just doing, what they have to do. Mm. It's not like, again, it's like the doctor or it's like the ER docs kicking somebody to the curb after they're stabilized. Mm. It's not like they're mean. Mm. It's not that it's not like they lack compassion. I mean, they're ER doctors. They're probably not a bunch of assholes, right? You don't get into that line of work if you hate people. But
well, because I think Richard Spencer is more closer to the journalist.
Yeah,
he's more of a popularizer. But I don't know if that would still be. I don't know. It's a difficult situation. I don't think that I would respond with violence, just because I still think the better option would be to take this thing to the public and point out the injustice and work for laws or take it through the courts and hope that you get a good lawyer and that society is swinging more towards your way rather than trying to fight it out.
And if it's not, if they're not swinging your way and things do suck, I mean, so this is kind of the thing, and I'm not really sure how to pin this down, but I do think that there might be circumstances where an undesirable or the kind of thing that you shouldn't advocate is appropriate. This might be one of those circumstances where I wouldn't say, yeah, you should go hit him, but, if someone does hit Richard Spencer in the face, it's like, well, I'm not going to look super hard to try and find you and put you in jail, right? Like, I'm not going to say people should go out there and hit him, but in this particular case, so like, this could be one of those. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, and unfortunately, the only one I can think of is terrible. So
I think they should treat it just as much as the same as they would treat any other assault like that.
Well,
like once you're selectively enforcing the laws, you're basically making things legal.
It's true, and I do see where that's obviously a terrible slide into vigilante violence, but I don't know. It's complicated, and I'm not a political scientist. There could be great reasons why, and there might be 1,000 historical examples where this exact kind of rebellion has shifted the tides of history. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, that would be a compelling point against my being tacitly against it.
I think the Trail of Tears is an interesting example because the Native Americans had basically already lost the war, right? Their option was to do what he said or be wiped out by the army. And at that point, it comes down to, is it worth being wiped out in order to inflict casualties on the people doing this to you?
I mean, that sounds like a completely different topic, and some might come down one way or another, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't really it's not quite analogous to the modern day situation, because unless we're talking about getting the military involved, we all have access to basically the same weapons. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if it's just going to be a group of thugs, with swastikas versus a group of people without swastika, a bunch of victims, but they all have, whatever guns you can buy, I mean, that's going to be a fairly even fight. It's not like, you've got, it's not like it was with the Trail of Tears, right?
No.
Although, I'm not sure what exactly went down historically with the Japanese internment camps. I mean, presumably everybody could go buy munitions, but it was just I guess that was, full-on military intervention, right?
Yeah,
so
that is an interesting case, though.
Yeah. I guess I don't think we're anywhere near where we were, certainly not with the Trail of Tears, where everyone's talking about, look, get out or we're going to drag your broken body out, or, with the Japanese internment camps. I think society in general is swinging way away from those things. I don't think we'll ever swing that far back into them. It could be that parts of society are swinging back a little bit, and that's why people like Spencer are getting platforms and shit. But I don't think, at least in my perspective, that we're nearly as badly off as we were a century ago.
Yeah.
Speaking of Spencer, there was another comment I wanted to just make really quick. I was going to reply on Reddit, but it's something that I've heard elsewhere too.
Can we skip to that right after we finish up not with that incident?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Not with that incident, ended that with another example might be the disproportionate number of black and mentally ill people executed in the U.S. Unlike healthcare laws, this is state-sanctioned killing that the majority of Americans favor, carried out only after due process. He does have a very good point. And he says, although the number of people actually killed isn't huge, how do you feel about violent resistance specifically to the death penalty? And I kind of like that he brought that up because I personally hate the death penalty, and I think it is a monstrous injustice and there should be no such thing, but I do not violently resist the death penalty. So I guess I have cast my vote in that particular case, that despite how bad I think it is, I think more violence to stop it is even worse.
I mean, I think also it's just pragmatically, like if you're talking about trying to maximize the amount of good you can do throughout your life, how many judges could you beat up before you get thrown in prison? 2 or 3. So I mean, if you're breaking into their houses and I mean, unless you're talking about killing them, if you're just gonna run in there and beat them up and say you shouldn't be sentencing people to death penalty, and
I don't think my doing that would have any effect on how society views the death penalty.
Probably not. So I mean, you could join an advocacy group that what's that amazing one that does investigations in like decade-old cases with DNA and stuff.
Oh yes, I know what you're talking about.
We'll find it.
The something project.
Yeah.
The Innocence Project.
Something like that. Anyway, there are organizations that if your goal is to minimize people killed by death penalty, you're better off giving money or volunteering for one of these organizations than you would be just, again, killing judges, right? Mm-hmm. Or whoever it is that you think is responsible. Voters, maybe? I mean, so I'm not in favor of the death penalty either, but there doesn't be a difference between saying, look, society as a whole thinks the death penalty is okay, and we're going to kill, a handful of serial murderers every year versus...
And a lot of perfectly innocent people.
Yeah, some are perfectly innocent people. Again, I'm not for this, but I'm just saying that there seems to be a difference between saying we're going to kill people after due process, after they've been in court, even if it's kangaroo court bullshit. There's something more desirable about going through the system and deciding on it that way rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to be the arbiter. Me personally, I'm not talking to anybody, and I'm going to go out and kill people, or whatever form of violent resistance takes. Like we talked about on the Nazi punching episode, there was that guy at University of Washington who got shot, and this was like a Bernie campaigner, right? So you have to be willing to accept false positives, whether, I guess, you're going through due process and death penalty or if you're going to go out for vigilante, right?
I guess in the least convenient possible world, what if it was the case that all the laws are exactly as they are right now for white people, but if you were a black person and you were found guilty of a law, it was the death penalty?
Yeah.
Or found guilty of breaking the law. And it doesn't matter what law it is. Like, you knocked over a 7-Eleven, you stole a few $100s. Well, you're found guilty, death penalty for you. At that point, do we have violent resistance?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a much more supportable case.
Right.
So again, it's the kind of thing...
Like, at what level of injustice are you willing to take up arms?
Yeah, and certainly I think that, again, like you said, if it's anything that's explicitly discriminatory, again, I guess I'm also wondering who to be violent against. I mean, it could just be that by being violent, you're raising the alarm, and somebody somewhere will notice, and somebody, will start passing laws, or, like Gandhi did that, but with the opposite of violence.
Yeah, just in general, doing destruction to businesses and government buildings, and hoping that the government eventually says, we don't want any more of this, let's change the laws so people stop rioting.
I mean, I could see a case for that. To the extent that I'm against this, it's pretty softly, but it's to the extent, it is, in principle, I'm against it, but in practice, things get a lot muckier, right? But
that is the argument I've seen, that if you gum up the works enough, the system reacts to having its works gummed up that badly.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess then it's a matter of being tactful, right? Like, is punching individuals in the street really gumming up the system? No. If anything, it's making this guy famous as hell. Mm-hmm. I mean, so one of the commenters, the great Nick, said that punching Richard Spencer is probably a bad thing But he said that he'll appear in public less because of this punch, which means that he'll appear on media less and have influence over fewer people. I kind of disagree completely at that point. I don't think I'm the only person who would never have heard of Richard Spencer if it wasn't for this incident. And then we went to check out his websites. His sites got clicks. Somebody got ad revenue.
This gave him a lot of press.
Yeah, and you don't have to leave your house to get press.
There's
if you have a computer in your house, or if a journalist is willing to come to your house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
there's a great article about someone who worked with. Do you remember Tucker Max?
No.
Tucker Max was a raging douchehole who on the internet would just say crazy misogynist things and came out with a book about basically how awesome it is to be a misogynist. And they had almost no revenue for advertising, so they bought a few really just extremely sexist, awful ads in the subway system of, I think, Chicago, or the bus system of Chicago, I don't know. And they immediately got censored and removed, and the city government said, hey, we're sorry about this. But they got massive media coverage for putting those up and then for getting them pulled. And they had tons of people protesting them. And it went to #1 New York Times bestseller because so many people heard about it. And even if 99.5% of people are decent people and think, oh, this is awful, that tiny small fraction who would have never heard of him are like, oh, hey, this guy, this sounds funny, or this sounds cool, let's read this. So it is, I believe the name of the article is, I wrote the book on outrage marketing or whatever, and you should stop playing into these people's hands. And I think it's a good point that a lot of this is just trying to get attention by getting the outrage, and it is counterproductive when we give them all this press.
I think so too, and that's sort of where we came down on the episode on how to deal with these people. You know, if it's a small enough minority like this, I feel like it's completely fine just to completely ignore them.
Yeah. I think the Nazi puncher did more for their cause than Richard Spencer has.
Watch, it was an inside thing. And the guy having it in front of a camera when he got hit, you know? Yeah. I'm not really that conspiratorially minded, but if I was, that's exactly the kind of thing I would orchestrate, right?
Mm-hmm. I did want to say, reading Great Rick's comment, what his words were, punching Richard Spencer probably is also a bad thing, but he said that he will appear in public less because of the punch, which means that he'll appear less on media and influence fewer people. Just something to think about. And yes, that is exactly what I was thinking about when I wanted to talk about this, and it is the reason that I wanted to put together that episode, because what you're basically saying is, just to think about, the use of terror made someone terrorized and shut up their speech. And I'm like, yes, that is exactly what I don't want.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of where I came down on the episode. Like, I'm not in favor of this guy being attacked, but like I said, part of me feels like the sun shines a little brighter every time a Nazi gets his nose broken. But I that's not the kind of thing I want to endorse. But if it's the kind of thing that becomes necessary, that's fine. And I'm not really. That's a pretty wishy-washy position, yeah. And it's not very actionable, and it could put me on the wrong side. If things do get really out of hand, I might be one of the last people on board to pick up a gun and go start shooting people, or whatever, again, form your violent resistance wants to take. I really don't think just punching these people is going to make any difference. You're going to make them martyrs. You're going to put them, you know, if the numbers go up, all these people are going to be on TV. And, you know, so I guess I'm not really sure where we're supposed to go with this.
Do you want to read Matt's counter argument to us? Or should I read it? Matt wrote us an email, and he had a counter argument for us, which is a thing that we like on this episode, in general, in our spheres. So Matt says, the reason there are only 300 of them, by of them, he means the people who attended Richard Spencer's conference, the kind of white supremacists that were on that video. The reason there are only 300 of them is because of the extreme cost you incur for publicly expressing that belief, including being punched on the street. Have you been on the internet lately? It's swarming with people capable of being Nazis. Every racist YouTube commenter is a future Nazi waiting for a movement to exist so he can come outside. To the extent that Trump is that movement, it's the perfect time to get busy punching. The thing about revolutions is that they never work if you can see them coming. Because they're a total reversal of power, you can't announce you're coming, or the movement will be squelched by the powerful faction you're looking to overthrow. This is an evolutionary selection pressure acting on revolutionaries where the only ones that ever occur seem to come out of nowhere. So the fact that you can't imagine a fascist revolution in America isn't evidence that there won't be one. And he goes on to cite a number of stats showing that very popular white supremacist websites such as Stormfront have as many as 100,000 visitors a month. And obviously not all of them are white supremacists, but he goes on to show that there's a organization with like tens of thousands of members registered online, which is also white supremacist, and tries to make the case that there's a much larger presence of white supremacists than we believe. They're just underground right now. And he ends with, but he also mentions, you said it was too late to respond with violence by the time the government was on the side of the fascists. So here's a terrifying bit of recent news from leaked FBI documents. And he linked us to an article, which I will link in the description, that says the FBI has been investigating white supremacists' infiltration of law enforcement, which apparently white supremacists have been getting jobs as police officers in various locales around the US and slowly trying to infiltrate them. Which kind of makes the whole laws thing a bit moot because they could selectively enforce only the laws that they like.
So I didn't read the attached link there, but is it saying that a shady organization of secret white supremacists has made the conscious decision to infiltrate the police and other areas of government, or that some police officers happen to be white supremacists?
Both.
Okay. Well, the first one's scarier.
Right.
I mean, you're going to get some percentage of assholes in every discipline, right? Or at least most every discipline. But if they're making the concerted effort to sneak in for this express reason, that is a little disconcerting. I don't really know, again, what the appropriate response is. I mean, if you punch a cop, it doesn't end well for you.
No.
And certainly, I guess, I'm always concerned about false positives.
I think he wants us to be worried that there are a lot more white supremacists that we were saying that there were, and that they're, kind of underground and building slowly.
Yeah, and some of these are stronger cases for that. I mean, YouTube commenters, if that's the case, then, what was it, last year, the year before, where the hashtag kill all white men was super popular, and that was among college campus girls. So I think that your average internet Nazi is going to just be some 15-year-old sharing frog memes. It's not going to be some person who actually has an actionable plan or wants to go out and do violence. They just think they're being edgy and they're entering puberty. But like I said, that's the case for some of these weak ones like the YouTube comments.
And I think Matt's contention is that punching the Nazis in public makes them less likely for people to want to join the edgy group and be vocal in public about it. I don't know if I agree with him, but I think that's what he's trying to say. Whereas I'm kind of more of the opinion that the more you punch them, the more the edgelords are going to want to join that group and be like, look at how edgy I am.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can say, again, too, I imagine from their position, if you're out there getting attacked for these beliefs, that just helps you win your oppression Olympics that you're trying to enter into, and saying, look, we're so marginalized that we're the only ones in the country that people are being violent against, etc. Again, I don't believe that, but I think that's the kind of thing that they're going to tell themselves in their internal narratives that's going to make them, I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think that's going to slow them down. If anything, it'll speed them up. And, then when somebody goes all the way and starts killing these people, then you're going to be making martyrs, and I think that's going to get out of control pretty quick. But that said, the Intercept article here is worrisome, so that's a nice way to put it. So there likely may be a bigger problem here than I was originally given to think. So thank you for enlightening me.
And in fairness, I didn't research that article very in depth. The FBI later walked back from that investigation and apologized for it, but it's not clear if that's because they had a lot of political pressure to do that.
Yeah. So it sucks, because if you do say that and you stop there, then you could say, oh, well, that's just evidence of how high this conspiracy goes, or somebody greased some palms. But it's also consistent with, sorry, we were actually wrong.
Right.
So I guess maybe it doesn't stand alone to make a case, but it might be evidence. I mean, these things happen all the time, too, where the IRS was super into investigating Operation Snowball with the Church of Scientology. And then they were threatened with just thousands of lawsuits, and you know what? Never mind. Sorry, bye. And so, I mean, sometimes that is just enough to push people back, even when you're right.
Yeah.
So something to think about. I don't know necessarily if, and I'm willing to grant everything that Matt wrote in is true. I still don't know if hitting the people is the appropriate way to do it. I mean, maybe it's actually voting. Maybe it's going to the door, getting signatures to put forward amendments or something. I wonder if there's some way in the system to go about doing this rather than just hitting people on the street. For me, I guess I'm not really sure if a lot of these are cases for killing people, right? If you want to make sure Richard Spencer never talks in front of a microphone again, you don't hit him in the face and then get him just swarmed in press coverage. You kill him, and then he can't say anything ever again, right?
If you really want to terrorize white supremacists into not talking, you kill him, and you make a big message out of that.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly if you're talking about how we're trying to win this war against white supremacists and stuff, I mean, wars aren't won with throwing punches, right?
It's interesting that they always walk back from that, though. They're like, no, beating people up is okay, but not killing.
Well, and I'm really glad they do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm absolutely not in favor of that. By no stretch of the imagination can I be reasonably interpreted as saying we should be out there killing them. We absolutely should not be. But it seems like all the arguments that you're making here apply more strongly to that case. Unless you're just trying to scare them to going inside, but it's not like they lose internet access if they don't go outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do, troll them? I mean, that's not really going to stop them either, right?
But having your life be uncomfortable enough that you are scared to go out of your house and go to the grocery store does suck, which is, I think, what their goal is.
Okay. thank you for stealing that from me, because it wasn't clear to me at all what their end goal was, if it wasn't to, silence them. Or I guess if it was to silence them, I wonder how you did that without killing them. But yeah, that's not going to make them stop. They're still going to vote for assholes. They're still going to be greasing palms. They're going to be doing all their shady shit. They're going to just be, writing fewer articles? Which is also, I guess, somewhat advantageous. I don't know.
No, I mean...
Certainly,
it's a sticky point, right?
Maybe certainly the point where I talked about killing people. I don't know if that can be interpreted. I'm terrified of being quote mined there. Did you have anything else to add on that one?
Not on that one.
All right. So we did have another write-in from, I don't know if we want to use people's names in write-ins or not, but...
Let's just call him G. His first initial is G.
Yeah, so G wrote in and basically made a defense of Richard Spencer, felt that we were a little unfair.
More than a little unfair. He said, you were very unfair to Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
So this is a good point. Richard Spencer is not a Nazi and has never advocated violence against anyone. I will agree that he is not a Nazi in that he is not a part of the American Nazi Party, and he has said several times that neo-Nazis don't like him. I'm not sure about the not advocating violence, because while he has always been very careful to say publicly that he is for a peaceful what did he call it?
Cleansing?
Yeah, a peaceful ethnic cleansing, and wants his political goals to be brought about in a peaceful method. That's kind of bullshit, because at this point, nearly or close to 1/3 of the U.S. population is minorities. You cannot peacefully deport 100 million people. First of all, if you are forcing 100 million people to leave, you are stripping them of almost all their assets. Because when the rest of the country knows that you have to leave, they can get your property for cheap. They know you aren't taking your house. They know you aren't taking most of your stuff with you, and you have no chance but to sell it for pennies on the dollar. So it is a massive looting of that demographic. And second of all, they have homes. They have families. Where are we going to put them? You can't just ship them off to other countries. So if you try to make 100 million people leave, there will be violent resistance. As there should be.
Well, and also, I mean,
it's bullshit.
It also begs the question too. Like, my family came over sometime before the Civil War. Parts of my family did, but there are definitely minority families in the United States who've been around the United States longer than that. Where do we send them to?
Right.
What is their appropriate homeland?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if it's not here, it seems pretty arbitrary to draw the line anywhere else.
And I'm pretty sure he wouldn't try to kick me out since I'm quite white and I come from Europe. But on the other hand, my parents moved here like in '84. They're more recent immigrants than most of the people that he was targeting. Why am I not getting kicked out? I believe it's just because of the color of my skin. And just this peaceful repatriation. How are you peacefully going to get all those people leave? You can ask them to leave. 100 million people aren't going to leave. So the only way to get them to go would be to force them, which is violent.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that seems like you've crossed the line from writing an article for your shitty blog to advocating something like the Trail of Tears, right?
Yeah.
Where, again, so that's the thing, is the immigration police come to your house and like, you know what? We want you out. Well, I don't want to leave. Okay, well, we're going to make you. And by make you, it's like at that stage, things are going to get violent, right? So, I mean, this seems like a perfect analogy to what Not Without Incident was saying on Reddit, that to the Trail of Tears example.
Or the Japanese internment.
Yeah. Yes, it's not supposed to be violent. I mean, if you want to just leave your shit and come out quietly, things don't have to get violent, is really what it's saying, but that's not really a peaceful solution, right? Yeah. I think any altercation where you're telling people what to do at gunpoint isn't, or I guess at the threat of gunpoint, and then of course the obvious implication of shooting your gun, that doesn't count as peaceful. No. It maybe counts as non-deadly.
I totally think it's a bullshit dodge to say I want this to happen peacefully, and we should not allow them to get away with that.
Yeah, we did acknowledge that Is Black Genocide Right article wasn't written by Spencer, so I don't see how fair it is. Well, I guess let me read this out of in context here. Mm-hmm. G went on to say, the old blog post you cited, quote, Is Black Genocide Right, unquote, was, as you correctly stated on the show, not written by Spencer, so I don't see how it is fair to associate Spencer with it, especially considering that he removed it from his site. I guess, I don't know how long it was on there for, and like I said, I first heard of this guy the day after he got hit in the face, and I did a weekend's worth of quick research. So, I mean, if it was true that he went on there, and he's like, I can't believe people publish it like this on my website. It's immediately gone. This user is banned. If that's what happened, cool. Props to him. I got the impression that wasn't the sort of stance that he took on these things, but I could be wrong.
You know, it's a tricky subject because I was perturbed when I saw people quoting that and attributing it to him because he didn't say it. And I dislike that it was associated with him so much because on the one hand, yeah, it was on his site. But on the other hand, no, he didn't write it. So how, at what point is the fact that it was on his site a tacit endorsement by him, and how much can he divorce himself from that? I think it's enough that I wouldn't use that as an argument against him personally, but when other people do, it's hard for me not to say I kind of see your point, that he is at least not against this sort of thing.
I agree. I mean, if he went on to remove it and stuff, that seems to be some indication, but...
Yeah. I dislike that it's being used, and I think it shouldn't be used against him, basically, is what I'm trying to say. He said plenty bad things by himself that you don't need to quote mine someone he was associated with on his website.
That's what I was going to say, is there's plenty of room to just find things that this guy said personally, and I don't think he needs guilt by association unless that association is ironclad. If this was somebody that he pushed up or he paid him or something and he's, helped publish his shitty book or something, like that's the kind of thing where we could say, look, he's helping this person's bad. But that doesn't even seem to be how far this went, so...
I am curious as to what all our listeners think about when guilt by association is valid, because I do remember saying earlier that I would not sign with Castilla House to publish anything I were to write because of what a douchebag and somewhat racist their owner is, and Vox Day owns Castilla House, and Theodore Beale, I guess is his real name, but he writes by Vox Day Online, and he is the same kind of I don't want to say white supremacist, but
asshole.
Yes,
that's pretty all-encompassing term.
Yeah, he's this sort of Richard Spencer type of person, and I would not want to be associated with him, so I would not sign with him. And it does make me wonder when someone signs with Castilla House, what exactly are they? Are they okay with their name being associated with?
That's important. I mean, I don't have a lot to add there other than that's a good query to put out there. So, skipping the rest of this email is pretty long, but it was thoughtful, and I appreciate.
Can I go on and read more of it?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not done with it either. I just wanted to thank the author G here. That I mean, clearly you disagreed with the way we approached it and felt that we weren't being fair enough, but you responded to us in a very polite way, and I appreciate you doing that. I mean, you cited some stuff here. I'm not necessarily moved by your arguments, but I appreciate the way you engaged them, and I think this is the way dialogue should go, right? I mean, he could have just hit us.
Right.
So, no, there was some other stuff on here that, by all means, go ahead and see what else was on there, Eneasz.
So, I'm approaching these in the order he wrote them. He said, I found it a bit odd that you objected to even considering genocide as a possibility. As rationalists, shouldn't you be willing to consider any idea? How do you know that genocide is wrong unless you consider it first? I would like to say that I am strongly against the death penalty, as we mentioned earlier. I have a blog called Death is Bad. I, in general, think death of any humans is a horrible thing, and I have thought about it extensively. So when I don't consider genocide, it's because I consider the death of even one person to be an atrocity, and the death of an entire group is much more so.
So yeah, as rationalists, I do think that one of the things we try to do is to engage every idea thoughtfully. That's not to say that we have to spend a lot of time going over things that, if we've decided that we don't like, it doesn't mean that we don't have to revisit them or that we're not compelled to address new arguments. But if you're against death in principle, and you've got solid reasons for that, then by extension you're against genocide. Mm-hmm. And I mean, is there some possible future or hypothetical where you might be in favor of it? Probably. I mean, if it's invading aliens that turn out to be really easy to kill, but they're really bad, sure, we can genocide the species.
If we lived in Middle Earth and orcs were literally just murder hobos that do nothing but rape and kill, then maybe it'd be okay. But we're not. These are humans.
Right.
I mean, but the thing is, we have considered genocide. I mean, we've heard of it at least, and there are very good reasons to not even bother bringing up that argument because it's so fucking stupid.
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. I do see where you're getting at. Like, shouldn't you engage this? Don't you claim to be a rationalist? And that I think it's fair to say that the point has been engaged and summarily thrown out, right? Not necessarily like, oh, we just don't talk about that. That's on our sacred box of things we don't talk about. It's like, no, that's on our box of shit we've settled our minds on.
Yeah.
And if you're going to make a new case for genocide that's super compelling, I mean, I'd be curious in reading it just morbidly. what could possibly be a compelling argument for that?
Go ahead and send us an article.
But I think the odds that I'll change my mind are pretty small. And that's not necessarily closed-minded of me. Like, the odds of me changing my mind about homeopathy working are also pretty small, right? Or, I don't know, Bigfoot wandering around North America. Like, we would have found one by now. Now, if we did find one, that would cause me to change my mind. So there's a difference between saying, like, I'm not interested in wasting my time, flying out to the woods of Northwest America to go look for Bigfoots, I don't know, It's not closed-minded to me to say, no, I'm not going to waste my time doing that because I don't think they're there. Closed-minded to be saying, I'm going to shut out any and all possible evidence that you're bringing forward. I feel like that's a digression, but I'm trying to make the point that I feel like it's okay to dismiss the topic of genociding a certain group of humans, more or less without really spending a lot of time talking about it, in the same way that I'm not going to waste my time thinking about lots of other stupid propositions.
If I see a proposition for a perpetual motion machine, anything that violates the law of conservation of energy, unless there is a number of really big Nobel laureates that have come out and endorsed this, I'm not even going to bother looking at it. I'm like, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality can work as far as we know it. I'm not even going to bother reading the first paragraph about your perpetual motion machine. I mean, that's how strongly I feel about, is genocide a good idea?
Yeah, I almost feel like that was too much time to spend on it.
Okay.
So, I mean...
So moving on then.
Well, and that's just, I mean, how uncomfortable did that make everybody sitting there talking about why genocide's a bad idea? I think that if that's the kind of thing that you're on the fence about, you need to settle your moral framework pretty hard before you're ready to come out and talk about it. Is it not impossible? Sure. Like, you know, the orcs example is probably the most reasonable one, right? Since none of us are orcs, I don't think that it's really worth... And is this too flippant? I feel like to engage it too much is to give it too much platform, but I mean, if anyone has, coming from?
Yeah, I do see. If anyone has a really good case for genocide, I guess shoot us something, but you probably will not get any traction with us.
Yeah, don't anticipate that. But again, I don't think that's a flippant dismissal, but I don't really know what else to say. So let's just move on.
Yeah.
All right.
This one I thought was very interesting. You claimed that Spencer gave a Nazi salute at the NPI event, NPI being this event we've talking about that was captured on video. That is false. If you watch the video, you'll see that he's raising a glass, not saluting. And I was like, what? So I went back and I watched the video, and I'll be damned, he was raising a glass and toast at the end. He did not actually give the Nazi salute.
I saw a picture of somebody doing a Nazi salute, though.
There were some people in the audience doing the Nazi salute, which again, we should go back to guilt by association. But I thought it was crazy how I had seen the video before, and in my memory, I remembered him giving the Nazi salute because I'd heard everywhere giving the Nazi salute in his speech. And I had a mental image of him giving the Nazi salute. And then I went back and looked, and no, there's a glass in his hand, and he's clearly kind of toasting. And that was a crazy brain thing that made me be like, well, this is why we have evidence. And I'm glad we have a video recording of this.
Right. Well, we had that friend post a Facebook post, you know, I forget what the context was, but it was like something alternate fact is true in the sense that, like, we grew up with the Berenstain Bears spelled the way that everyone thinks it was spelled, but it wasn't, that where Nelson Mandela died in prison, all these things that, like, everyone thinks are true, but they're not.
Yeah.
This seems to be just one of those things where, yeah, I had the same thing, that I thought that I saw this video. And
that
apparently
Sinbad was in a genie movie.
Right. So anyway, yeah, fair enough.
So that
maybe
not
on this case, maybe not on film was he giving a Nazi salute. So our bad.
Some people in his audience were giving the Nazi salute though.
So I mean, again, guilt by association. I mean, it's not like he did it. So I mean, but if you're in the room with people who are enthusiastically doing a Nazi salute, the guy who wrote in here he's making the case that it might have been a tongue-in-cheek, ironic spirit, but I don't know how you get that from the footage. And if it is.
Well, I can kind of see how it is because...
But that's a really... there's so much baggage with that gesture.
There is a lot, but so as he pointed out, he said... Well, let me read this real quick. I would also guess that those who did salute weren't even really Nazis, but were saluting in a tongue-in-cheek, ironic spirit. People in the alt-right are called Nazis all the time by the left, and some of them find it fun or funny to embrace the label rather than argue against it. Which I totally see, because every now and then you hear people saying that since I'm signed up for cryo, it is my own crazy religion, and I am just as bad as the people who think that Jesus is going to rapture them or whatever. And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, fine. It's my religion. This is my sacred burial right when I die. I want my body to be frozen instead of buried, and believe what you want because I don't really care. And I sort of see that point, especially if you're in a group that gets shit on constant. How many times have we been told that people on the right are Nazis? I've been hearing it since Reagan, that Reagan is a Nazi and the Republicans are Nazis. And I can see at some point people on the internet being like, you know what? Fuck you all. Fine. I'm a Nazi. Hail Hitler, you know? Like in a sort of a reverse trolling, ironic sort of way. And I can kind of see his point. But on the other hand, I don't want us to lull our way into Nazism because for every 10 people that are doing it ironically, there's at least one person who's like, yes, we should be killing the Jews.
One,
Hail Hitler.
One of the people in the group doesn't know it's a joke,
Yes,
right? So
yeah.
we can make up whatever percentage we think that is. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I think that might be a reasonable concern, that there's exactly some percentage of people that thought we were all joking, right? And then one person shows up with their backpack full of ammo and a couple of guns and like, wait, are we not really doing this? So
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we don't joke about things like that very much, the Nazi thing, because there are people who will take it a certain way. I would not be comfortable with that anyway. Even as a joke, I'd be like, guys, we're still joking, right?
yeah,
I don't want to be the guy who realizes that, like, oh, it turns out that now 4/5 of the people are Nazis and I was the only one who still thought it was a joke.
right.
Oops.
So that is interesting, and that was it's an uncomfortable fact, but I'm all for putting the truth out there.
Yeah.
Spencer didn't salute at that event, so, or didn't Nazi salute at that event, so there it is.
I keep thinking, because, you know, I've been on panels at Denver Comic Con a number of years now, and some of them have been pretty large, like 400 people, right? And afterwards, after we're done, you know, having our talk for 48 minutes, and we close and there's the applause, what if some of the people, like, gave me a Nazi salute from the audience? Like, what would I do at that point? I'm pretty sure I wouldn't shut down everything and be like, hey guys, let's not do that after the talk's already over. I don't know.
I could see you at least writing a blog post saying, hey, I saw this happen. What the fuck was that? Was that some
Yeah.
sort of uncomfortable joke? Let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Or at least explain what you're coming from. But if it is already like sort of an inside joke, I mean, if that might actually be true. It's an uncomfortable inside joke. I mean, maybe get a better sense of humor.
You know,
but,
I know I did it a lot when I was a hardcore atheist. When I had just
Nazi salute?
No, not Nazi salute, God. No, when I had just come out as an atheist. And I know some people who are witches as well, and it's a thing that, like, oh yes, we worship Satan. Hail Satan, you know? Let's go drink the blood of the babies tonight like we do every night.
Oh, sure.
Because
Yeah.
you hear that from Christians a lot. If you're an atheist, it means you actually worship Satan. And just the you know, the neo-pagans nowadays, or even the old school pagans, who apparently have a beef with the neo-pagans, which is interesting, but they will every now embrace and be like, yeah, no, I'm totally doing the baby eating tonight. That's what we witches do. And that seems a lot more funny from this side, you know?
Yeah, I guess
I'm a big supporter of the Church of Satan.
that said, if there was any reasonable concern that some percentage of atheists was actually eating babies, it would stop being a funny joke to make.
Yes, it would.
So maybe that's where the line is. Like, I mean, if it's true that some of them are joking, that's fine, but this isn't the kind of thing that you should be complicit about.
Yeah.
And to the extent that anybody was not joking when they said, yes, atheists eat babies, or yes, we atheists eat babies.
Oh, God.
To the extent that someone might not have been kidding, then the whole thing stops being funny and the entire group should stop making that joke, right?
Yeah. Every now and then you do wonder about the guy who says that we should kill religious people. And I think that's why there's never any jokes about, haha, let's throw all the religious people in ovens. Because that's a place we're not willing to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Are you talking about a specific guy or a hypothetical guy?
No, but I mean, there was at least, I remember some of the more virulent people in the forums I was on that was like, we really should just kill anyone who's seriously religious because there's no way to help them and they're bringing down all of the rest of humanity.
Well, not to belabor too far in that rabbit hole, but like, you were seriously religious for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, good thing you weren't killed before you got a chance to change your mind.
Right.
Right? So that seems like a great argument for not killing people before you try and talk to them.
Yeah. And
Probably after.
And certainly no one else made a joke about it.
Right.
There was no, haha, yes, let's give the, whatever the equivalent of the atheist Nazi salute is.
Fair enough.
Well, I guess what we're saying is, don't be given the Nazi salute, or people are going to think bad things about you, and it'll be your own goddamn fault.
Yeah, I think that's a fair takeaway. I mean, if you're willing to just roll with that association, well, then you're willing to roll with being called a Nazi and all the nonsense that comes with it.
Yeah.
But if you want to be taken more seriously, you don't make those kinds of jokes, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not convinced everyone who's doing that is joking.
Right.
I think it would be an outlandish claim to say that literally everyone is joking, right? Some of these people seem quite earnest, and you'd be playing mind reading games by saying, no, I actually think you're joking, despite that you're telling me you're not, right?
Right.
So yeah, forget that noise.
Oh, I was wrong. It was G who was trying to convince us that there's a lot more Nazis than we think there are, or a lot more alt-right people than we think there are.
Oh, it wasn't the last write-in.
Yeah,
Okay.
It says it's a movement that's spread out across the country and indeed the world, so the 350 people that could make it to DC for the conference isn't the best baseline. You should consider the fact that white nationalist ideals are so persecuted by the mainstream culture that many adherents of the movement do not want to be seen supporting it publicly, and consequently wouldn't go to a conference even if they could. If we look at the web traffic, and then he gave us the stats on how many people go to these websites. So I guess it was the pro-right guy who was trying to tell us there's more right people out there than we thought.
And that's probably true. Or excuse me, that is true. That's in fact who wrote that in. But yeah, I'm sure that the alt-right community is bigger than these 300 people. I meant the people who were earnest enough about it to go to these conferences. Now you're right, there are probably social disincentives from going. So maybe that number would have been 10 times bigger. I guess the point that I was making didn't really hinge on it being 300 or 500. It was more like, even if it's 3,000, even if it's 10 times people who went, or even arguably 100 times people who went, we're still looking at like less than 1% of people.
Yeah.
We're not looking at half of our neighbors, right?
But once we start getting to 30,000, I would start to be a little bit worried.
Same. No, I totally agree. But I guess like I said, even if it did get all the way up to being 300,000 people,
That's still 0.1%.
yeah. This isn't it's not as mainstream as standard republicanism, right? Or conservatism, or Republican ideologies. There was one last thing here that G wrote in was, for a podcast that is ostensibly not about politics and meant to appeal to a wide audience, you do express your political opinions on the show quite frequently. As a conservative with moderately positive opinion of Trump, I often find it frustrating that a podcast which I otherwise enjoy so often drops in remarks which I consider horribly backwards without any discussion or consideration of other points of view. That's fair, and I really appreciate the way that you wrote that in rather than, flaming and being irate or something. Especially like on leading up to the election, we were, I think, much more guarded about being outspoken against the president and certain actions and factions and groups. So like, if we haven't made it clear, ideologically, I want everyone to be able to talk and be comfortable around each other sharing ideas.
Yeah, this is what prevents punching.
Yeah.
Being able to have an open discourse.
And exactly. But that doesn't mean that I don't have my opinions. To the extent that G wrote in, to the extent that you're right-wing, I'm left-wing, right? Maybe probably even less so. I think I'm pretty moderate on a lot of things. But I think there's a difference between saying, you have to agree with us or you're stupid, and maybe we came off that way. And if that's true, that might not have been fair.
I would like to see, if anyone, or G specifically, thinks that there's remarks that are literally horribly backwards and that we didn't give any discussion or consideration, write us in and let us know, because I would be interested to know in what those points are and maybe mention them on our next listener feedback.
Yeah, I'd be fine with talking about that. I'm trying to think of anything right off that was horribly backwards, but if we're super biased, we might not have caught it. So
exactly.
By all means, let us know. I don't want to be the asshole who's pissing people off. Obviously, if Spencer heard our last podcast, he wouldn't be a fan of most of the things we said, or maybe not Spencer in particular, but some of the people in that camp. I'm not super concerned with being charitable, or with those people coming away from the show and being, happy having listened to it. But there's a midline. I don't want to scare away half the population and make it seem like this show isn't safe for conservative-minded people, or at least not fun to listen to. So was that too, I don't know.
No, I think that was right on.
All right.
All I have left is one thing, which is just a note to drop in. It's not something we really have any, or at least I don't have anything to comment on it. Peregrine Took, I think, is how the name would be pronounced, says, since it came up, in Germany we have a criminal offense called Volksverhetzung. I think it's
I'm glad
pronounced.
You tried reading that rather than me. I wasn't prepared to engage.
I took a little bit of German, but it was a long time ago, so I don't know if that's right. Anyways, it's basically a law against incitement. Roughly translated, the relevant part reads, anyone who, in a manner which is likely to disturb public peace, incites hatred against parts of the population or calls for violence or arbitrary action against them, attacks the human dignity of others by insulting, maliciously contempting, or slandering parts of the population, will be punished with imprisonment for 3 months to 5 years. There is a lighter sentence for those who only do so in writing, films, computer games, etc. Anyone who denies the Holocaust in Germany is guilty of this, and it is known over here and sometimes a cause for great indignation that no such law exists in the US, and anyone can say more or less anything. Generally, we do not understand why you don't just make it punishable by law to incite hatred against part of the people, especially if the way it is done is by telling lies or slandering the minority you want to incite hatred against. And I don't really have anything to say to that aside from I think that is an interesting law, and I kind of like it, but it's good to have another opinion.
Yeah, so a carefully crafted and extremely the problem with, I think, making certain forms of speech illegal, and so the person who wrote in had expressed some frustration about, or at least some confusion about why America is so gung-ho, free speech no matter what. The same freedoms that allow people to say terrible things are the ones that allow people to say good things that no one wants to hear. The only thing that keeps the engine of progress moving forward is being able to talk about whatever idea it is. And if you put some things off the table, then those things will, never get moved forward. But, again, an anti-Holocaust law, it's hard to see how that's going to hurt things in particular. But that's a slippery slope to, anti-blasphemy laws or
lèse-majesté laws.
Yeah, whatever other things that might have a bad impact down the road or plausibly could. So having a blanket thing of look, we're not going to say we can't talk about anything. having that base rule of just free speech around the board, I think that it's one of those things. This is actually one of the things that this is probably a bigger topic. Maybe we could save it for later. But like I'm like utilitarianism on one hand and free speech on the other. Like I'm kind of, even like if it's a case where, look, some bad things might happen if you say this, I'm kind of in favor of like just keeping free speech around in general.
Because the higher order effects are more beneficial.
Exactly. So like, one obvious thing, like would be, should I have the free speech to burn a Quran knowing that, people will set embassies on fire around the world? I probably shouldn't, because I know that'll happen. But to say that I can't just because some people are going to be violently outraged by it, I mean,
you can get violently outraged about anything.
Exactly.
People used to get violently outraged that a black person would date a white person.
And if you're going to say, look, anything that has a violent consequence based off of your speech or your actions, that's going to leave anyone who's any group of bullies who's ready to be violent, going to let them dictate whatever you can say and think, or say and do, right? So free speech wins, I think, is an important axiom for just progressive society. Again, I'm not saying that there's no way that you can curtail certain corners of it.
I personally do think that in general, the laws protecting free speech are great because they do help us get to the truth eventually. But I'm such a big fan of truth, and I really hate the propaganda lies that sometimes people spew out, that I am willing for there to be some laws about if something can be proven to be malicious and just blatantly false, that any reasonable person should have known better and not spread these things, then yeah, it's fine to haul them into jail, as long as you can prove it in court. Because there's certain things that I think as long as they're not illegal, I'm going to uphold everyone's freedom to say whatever they want. But there's some things that I think maybe could be pushed into the line of illegal, and in that case, we would have someone arrest them and take them to court rather than punching them in the street.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a really easy example would be like accusing the person who, didn't give you promotion, accusing them of being a pedophile.
Right.
That gets people out with pitchforks outside their house. I mean, I was exercising my free speech isn't a good response to that, right? You're lying to incite terrible consequences for this person. So, I mean, don't let my endorsement of free speech be taken to where, you can say or do literally anything. I guess with truth and honesty behind it, I'm a fan of free speech.
But it was interesting to get the perspective of someone who is living in Germany.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, I think I can see why it would make sense for laws like that to exist in some parts of the world. Even if I have mixed feelings about them, they make a lot of sense to me. So, well, this went on longer than we thought it was going to.
Dope.
Oh well.
I hope we didn't bore anyone. If we did bore anyone, hope you didn't listen to it, because you can always stop and fast forward or listen to something else, right?
Yeah, this is on you if you're bored.
All right. We'll see you all in a couple weeks.
Thanks.